one other example I wanted to go over here while in the section about reading and writing files and the general idea of storing persistent data is going to be basically, let's take this as a preview of the proper way to do it. It's certainly beyond the scope of this course, so let's take this as sort of preview on doing this. Some of y'all, I believe, have already had a database class. For those who have, will recognize this. If you haven't had a database class, this is going to look extra confusing. But the best way, one of the best ways to store the data is in a relational database, because then it's quick, right? With that opening example, those who are familiar with databases or relational databases probably thought that. So the best way to store this data would be in a database, the employee data and pay rate and all that. And we can always access databases from programming languages. You'll see that in later classes. Python happens to have a very popular one built in, which is SQLite, SQLite. And to import it, it's SQLite 3. I'm just going to go ahead and import everything there. The module SQLite 3 is the one built-in one we want to work with for SQLite, which is a really nice database. It's a fully functional database, and it's kind of set up to go on designed to go on the back end of programs. So then we store our data, get the persistent storage of data with all the benefits of the speed that comes with working in structured query language, which is one thing that a lot of people maybe misunderstand a little when they first learn about databases, and that's SQL, which is SQL, structured query language, isn't a single language. That's an entire category of languages. So the one I'm getting ready to type here might look a little bit different than the one you're familiar with. I'm not sure what's being used in the database class that often runs nowadays, but there'd be some slight differences, but some of it should look familiar if you're familiar with SQL. And again, this is beyond the scope of the class. I just kind of wanted to at least mention one of the best ways to do this, a very formally correct way to do this, to store our data and retrieve it, is using a relational database. So I'm going to create this thing called connection DB. There's a lot of object-oriented stuff going on here, so some of the syntax might not necessarily make sense. Then I'm going to create this thing called a cursor. That is our formal name for it. So I'm going to connect to this database that I just created here, which is a text file, a database in the form of a text file, a file. I'm going to connect to it and create this thing called cursor, which is essentially like a handler. It's the thing that can see our data, so we can ask it what the data is. And then we use it to access the database. So then we can use that cursor to run SQL statements. And I'm going to do this with use the 3 quote marks on the string. Been using those for comments, but it is kind of a string, and one of the big advantages of it is we can put line breaks in to make things easier to read as we put it together, and the interpreter will just ignore the line breaks when we use the 3 quote marks. So putting in a SQL statement here, create table if not exist. I don't know, test table. That's probably a good name. Then I'll split this up into lines because it's going to get a SQL state, create a SQL create table, so it's going to be kind of long for those who are familiar with it. First off, we need a ID, integer, primary key, auto increment. And I mentioned that SQL is an entire category of languages. This word right here, auto increment, that's one of the ones you could, as you learn more and more of them, that's one of the words you can look for to help narrow down which one you're working with in particular, because that's often spelled different in different languages. So this might look a little bit different than you're used to if you're familiar with SQL or have had the database class that covers SQL. But it's a little bit different, but it should still look familiar. And I'm just going to do my basic one. Create a text field for name, age field, we usually give that as an integer, and the town field, that's going to be text again, that'll work. I'll come down to the next line, and it is a SQL statement, so we need a semicolon to end the SQL statement, and then, whoops, then close the quote marks. And that's the big advantage of the 3 quote marks. When we do a string that way, we can put in line breaks and the interpreter will just ignore them in the 3 quote marks. Then we can run that query, cursor.execute, the create query we just did. Then with this, we have to do connection.commit, connection.close. And I know this is going very, very fast without a lot of explanation, but this is beyond the scope of the class. I mostly just wanted to let you know it's available and kind of point you in this direction, because this is often a better way to do this when we work with data in a program, because then we get all the speed of a relational database, so we can store and retrieve lots of data very quickly. So again, this line is going to kind of look the same. We're going to connect to that database that we created, then create a cursor object, which is very similar to a handler, but a little different. Again, beyond the scope of this class. But we can think of it as a handler for the database. Then we can create some sort of insert query. I'll just do one here. Insert into what I call it, test table. I'll just put in a name, age, town, then put in the values, Chris, 41, and Clarksville. That should look familiar to some of you all. It's a SQL statement, so I need a colon and 3 quote marks of the string. But again, just kind of previewing that this is available. Again, cursor.execute that insert query. Commit to the changes in the database and close the connection. That's kind of the idea there. Put in some white space. And I guess we'll do the same thing again. So connection equals connect to that database, create a handler, I'll just call it that, connection.cursor, and I guess the last thing is going to be a select query for a quick example. and put that up there. So select query is going to be, well, a normal select query. I'll just do a regular string here. Select everything from test table. That looks the same almost any language we're working in. Then we'll have our cursor object execute that query. And, well, in this case, we have to put it somewhere. Again, the details are beyond the scope of this class. This is really a preview more than anything. But then once we put it somewhere, we can just loop through that. So for row in data, it's database stuff, so we're taking row of table at a time. So for loops just kind of go through whatever the computer reads out of the thing we ask it to look at in Python. And here I'll just print that out. So, whoops. Yeah, that was fine. Just print that out. So go up here, save this real quick. It was very quick with very little details. Relational database. Again, this is kind of beyond the scope of this class. This is really just a preview to let you know this is available. Oh, I figured there was one somewhere. Oh, whoops. Used to doing PHP lately, where that same method with the same name is written in camel case. In Python, it's in juxtaposition. There we go. So, well, it's showing the data here, and we'll get into this next week. It's showing it as a tuple. If we come over to the file, here's the file it created. I'll write it with Notepad++. So you can see it's there are some words in there, but there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily readable format, but it's relational database format for these things. If I try to just open that, get this message attempting to open a type of system file. So it's not the computer knows that should be in the background of software. So this is a relational database kind of designed to go in the background of our software. The proper way to store stuff. You hopefully those of you who are familiar with databases thought that with that opening example in these videos, employee name, pay rate, and all that is the sort of thing that should probably be kept in a database, and then we can run queries. So that's a kind of preview mode. Not getting into it, it's definitely beyond the scope of this class, but to let you know that is available in the language. SQLite is a very popular one, and it is fully integrated into Python. It's there for us to work with anytime we need it. And I guess, yeah, if you're familiar with databases, let you know so you can kind of mess around with that, because that's, I guess we could say, a more proper way to store and retrieve data than a big text file. So I wanted to at least preview that, let you know it exists. And yeah, that's kind of all I had to say about that. It's if you take the 220 class with me in summer, we'll go over that in much more detail. But yeah, relational databases exist in the languages ready for us to work with.